Good evening, fellow storytellers. I am here. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you tonight. I am here to talk a little bit about ways that you can make your presentations a little better. And that is to not only tell your story, but to show your story. What do I mean by that as far as showing your story? It's very common for us when we're talking, especially in front of a group, not to move very much or feel as though we shouldn't be more statuesque. But what if I were to tell you a story and not move? I would have to use my voice, maybe my expressions, in order to let you know what's going on. But I can so enrich a story if I use movement. For example, let's say that I talk about my Cadillac. My Cadillac was my favorite car. When I first saw this Cadillac, it was huge. It was a boat. I opened up the trunk. It was so big. I mean, big. You could put 3 big men in there and close it up and never find them. At first, this Cadillac, as I drove it, rather intimidated me because it was so long. The nose was way out there. It was so long to the back. But as a homeowner, I found out that my Cadillac was the best truck you could ever ask for. In fact, it got to be known as a truckalac. Let me tell you why. Did you know that the trunk is so big that if you prune a bunch of trees and you cut them to where that they are 4 feet, not 3 feet, but 4 feet long, you can stuff those in there and fill up the back of the trunk. But then, did you know that area between the back window and the trunk, you could put 6-foot limbs in there and fill that up? And did you know that wasn't enough? If you had 15-foot long branches, you could throw them up over the top and then tie them down. Now imagine telling a story like that without movement. It would not be as expressive and you would not understand as well how I use this Cadillac. Did you also know that if you have a 5-foot bathtub, that you can stuff that into the trunk and it only sticks out about 2 feet? You don't even have to put a red flag onto it. Now imagine trying to express that without movement. Well, that's fine when you're working with something like a Cadillac. But what if you're telling a story about a dog? Let me tell you about one of my dogs. It was a Cocker Spaniel. When I got him, he was about 10 years old. And he was not the best behaved 10-year-old Cocker Spaniel you could ask for. He was very skinny. He was also one that was very food aggressive. Well, guess what? I fed him enough to where that he put on almost 20 pounds, turned out to be the nicest, sweetest dog, except he wasn't that bright. On his best day, his IQ, if you had an IQ test, would probably be about 68. He would be out in the yard with another dog that we had, a big dog that looked like he was a huge wolf type dog. They would be out playing and they'd be fine. And then pretty soon, my dumb Cocker Spaniel would come running across the yard to attack the big dog. Well, the big dog's legs were so big that my little Cocker Spaniel couldn't even get his mouth around it. And pretty soon, the big dog would go crunch. And dog would come back to me and he'd be looking at me like, I did a good thing. I attacked the big dog. Aren't I? Blood is running down his side. I love you, but do you have to do that? Now, using my voice and using the language that I'm using, I paint a picture. But with my movement, I'm able to tell you even a bigger story. Another story we could talk about would be out golfing. My son took me out to the golf range. And yes, I could talk about how it would be to sit and putt the balls or to try to strike the balls. But if I were to show you the trouble I had getting my hands into the right place, you would pay far more attention to me if I showed you, well, let's see, it goes, he said to put. Then also, if I'm trying to get into position and I wiggle and okay, it goes this way, and he comes up and he says, nope, that's not the way you do it. You have to do it this way. And then you scrum back and you swing as hard as you possibly can. And, you know, if I didn't move, the ball would be just in exactly the place I put it, except I stepped on it. Not a good thing to do as your foot rolls over to the side. These are the things that we can do in our storytelling to make things much more interesting on stage. Now, depending on how large of a stage you have, whether or not you want to make the big movements or the smaller movements. Now, such as in Zoom, you've only got this little box. I could stand up and go backwards and have more space, but in person, I can talk about how big and how round and how full, etc. That is the kind of stories that will make people remember what it is that you're talking about. So anyway, that's part of what my story is and part of what I'm working on. So it's more of an instructional, purposeful story. And that's what I'm working on. I know it's old hat for us, but for someone that's just getting started, I figured that it's something that could help them. So, and it is the story of Mr. and Mrs. Blackbird, and they're high up in the tree. And as they sing, you would hear silver and gold landing on your ears. See, I can use that one as part of my storytelling too. Silver and gold as it would land on your ears. And all that passed underneath it. Love to hear the sound of Mr. and Mrs. Blackbird. Well, one day the king came by and he heard Mr. and Mrs. Blackbird singing. And he said to his slaves, get that bird down from there, put him in a cave. I would like to hear them next to my bed as I wake up in the morning and when I go to bed at night. Well, the slaves went about to try to capture Mr. and Mrs. Blackbird. Well, they caught Mrs. Blackbird, but not Mr. Blackbird. And he watched in horror as he saw his wife put into a silver cage and taken away to go to the palace. He became very angry. He became so angry, he decided that he was going to go save his wife. What he did is that he went to the bramble thicket next to him and he picked up a long thorn and he put it in his belt to act as a sword. He went and got a walnut shell and put one half of it on his head as a helmet. He took the other half and made it into a drum. And with that, he marched off to go save his wife from the palace. On his way, he saw Mr. Fox. Well, Mr. Blackbird, where are you going? I am going to the king and I'm going to get my wife back. He stole my wife. Well, the fox said, I too have aught with the king. I will go with you. And the blackbird said, crawl into my ear and we will go to the king and we will declare war on him. So the wolf crawled into the ear of the blackbird. And when he was settled, the blackbird beat on his drum as he marched down the road. Rat-a-tat-tat, 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 as he marched along. It wasn't very long that he came to a rope that was tied in knots alongside the road. And the rope raised up and said, Mr. Blackbird, where are you going dressed like that? I am declaring war on the king. I am going to get my wife back. He stole my wife. And the knotted rope raised up and said, I too have aught with the king. Blackbird said, come crawl into my ear and we will go and declare war on the king. The rope unknotted itself and crawled in to Blackbird's ear next to the fox. When he had settled, the Blackbird started marching on again. Rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. Well, along the way, he came across the queen ant and her horde. The ant, Queen Ant, said, "Mr. Blackbird, where are you going?" "I have declared war on the king. He has stolen my wife and I'm going to get her back." Well, the ant, Queen Ant, said, "I too have aught against the king. He stomps on us, he poisons us, and I wish to go to war too." And he says to the queen, "Gather up your armies, crawl into my ear, and I will declare war on the king." So the ant got her armies and crawled into the Blackbird's ear, next to the rope and next to the fox. And when they had settled in, the Blackbird started marching down the road again. Rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. Not before long, he came across a pond. And as he went over the bridge, the pond said, "Mr. Blackbird, where are you going?" "I have declared war on the king. He has stolen my wife and I will get her back." The pond said, "I too have aught against the king. He poisons my water and makes it not good. So therefore, I too wish to declare war on the king." "Crawl into my ear," said the Blackbird. The pond rose up and crawled into a pool in the Blackbird's ear, next to the ball of ants, next to the rope, and next to the fox. When all had settled in, the Blackbird started again to attack the king. Rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. It wasn't very long. Knock, 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 knock. The Blackbird pounded on the door of the palace. A slave came and opened the door and says, "What is it that you wish?" "I have declared war on the king. I wish to see the king." The slave looked at him and said, "You wish to declare war on the king," and takes the Blackbird into the king's chambers. As he walks up to the throne, the king looks down at him and says, "What is it that you want?" "I have declared war on you. I want my wife back." The king looked at him and started to laugh. "What is this?" The king says to the slaves, "Take and put him in with the chickens. Surely the chickens will peck him to death and I will be gone with this." So the slaves went and put him in with the chickens' coop that night. As the chickens approached the Blackbird to attack him, the fox crawled out from the Blackbird's ear and so terrorized the chickens that they all huddled in a corner. The next morning, when the slaves came out to see what was left of the Blackbird, they were surprised. The chickens were in the corner. The Blackbird was well, rocking back and forth, beating his drum, rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. Well, the slaves took the Blackbird back to the king. The king looks at him. "You survived the night?" "Yes." The next night, the slaves put the Blackbird in with the horses because the horses would surely trample the Blackbird to death. The rope crawled out of the Blackbird's ear and became a whip, and so made the horses behave that they did not have a chance to even trample onto the Blackbird at all. When the slaves came back the next morning, they were surprised. The horses were all in their stalls, so well behaved, and the Blackbird was once again marching back and forth, beating on his drum, rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat, "I declare war on the king." The next night, the king ordered that the Blackbird be put in with the elephants. The elephants would surely kill the Blackbird this time, would surely trample him to death. After the doors were closed and the elephants came close, the ants crawled out from the blackbird's ear and crawled up onto the ants and tickled them so much that they left the blackbird alone all night long. When the slaves came back again to see what had happened to the blackbird, the elephants were all so in the corner, not doing anything to the blackbird, and the blackbird is walking back and forth. Rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. This time, the king could not understand what magic the blackbird had that it was able to survive the chickens, the horses, and the elephants. That he said, "Take this blackbird and tie him to my bed. I will watch him tonight. I will see what magic this blackbird has to survive all this." Well, that night, as the king went to sleep, the water came out from the blackbird's ear and began to wash the floor of the king's chambers, the bed chambers. And the water just kept coming and coming and coming. And it wasn't very long that the bed was floating, and the king was so afraid that he was going to drown that he said, "Release the female, release the blackbird's wife, release the blackbird's wife." And he reached up and he opened the cage, and the blackbird and his wife flew out of the window and flew all the way back to their tree. The blackbird and his wife, once again, high up in the tree, as they sang their songs in the evening and in the morning, it sounded like silver and gold that was coming out of the trees and hitting the ears of all those who listened. Thank you.